Hey, this is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. We're going to do episode 4 on our Wasteland Warfare series, and today we're going to talk about hits, armor, and damage. Before we dig in, I want to invite you all to click on one of the links in the description. Those are Amazon links if you are looking to get into Wasteland Warfare. I've got links to the Institute Core Box, the Super Mutants Core Box, and a set of Fallout Wasteland Warfare dice. If you do click the link and purchase using the link, it won't cost you anything extra, but it does help you get into the game, and then they do give me a kickback. So it's a great way to support the channel while getting involved in the games that we keep talking about. Thank you very much. And then one other thing before we dive in. I had some people ask me, Chris, how come you don't put models on the table? How come you don't give very visual examples when you do your videos? And it's only been one or two people. And there's actually a reason for that. My videos are actually designed in a way that you don't have to physically watch them. You could actually put them on in the background while you're doing painting or maybe some hobbying. You could listen to them. And then the way that I'm trying to present the information is in such a way that while you listen to them, you can get all the information you need without having to be glued to the screen. So you could put it on the background while you're working or doing whatever, and then you could kind of listen and get the information without having to be tied to a monitor. And that's why I do it that way. And when I explained it to the couple people that had asked me, because it just came up actually, and when I had explained it to the guy that was asking me, he was just like, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense." He said, "That's exactly how I watch them. I was just curious why you didn't do that." So just figured I'd let everybody know that's actually why I don't do that. That's why I do things the way I do them. So let's dig in. Today we're going to talk about how to make attack rolls. And, we did do a video on skills. So a lot of this is going to be familiar. I will put a card a little bit later so that you can link back to that episode if you want to. But we did do that, and it's going to be very familiar if you've watched it. We're going to talk about how the process works, and then we're going to talk about resolving hits and resolving damage. I know it doesn't look like a lot, but once we start digging in, you're going to find out that this is actually a little bit more complex and beefier than it initially looked. Making an attack. So this is the process, and it doesn't matter whether it's a ranged attack or a close combat attack. For the most part, the process is identical. What you're going to do is you're going to choose the weapon you want to attack with. So if you're in close combat, you have the option of making a ranged attack or a close combat attack, which again, we talked about last episode. And then you will find the skill that's relevant to that weapon and that attack. So if we were going to make an attack with a rifle, we would find the rifle. And so, like on the Soul Survivor card, the rifle's next to perception. The Soul Survivor's perception is 7, etc. If you wanted to do missile launcher, the missile launcher icon on the Soul Survivor card is next to strength, and its strength is 5. And the reason I keep bringing up the number is because that's going to be the target number you use when using that skill. Once that relevant skill is chosen, again, like I just said, you determine the target number, and the base target number for the attack is the rating of the special attribute that corresponds to the skill. So, again, going back to the Soul Survivor card, it's got a rifle next to perception. Its perception is 7. That means its base target number is 7 or lower, because lower is better on hit rolls in Wasteland Warfare. Keep in mind that some models will use different stats for their abilities and their skills. So, if I remember correctly, Gutsies use agility when making ranged attacks, not perception. Um, so, just something to keep in mind is just because it's perception on one card doesn't mean it's going to be perception on another. So, make sure you're actively checking. After you determine what your skill is and your base target number is, you're going to determine any hit roll modifiers. And that's like any of the -2 tokens or any kind of cover from terrain, or like Coulter, who's a Raider in power armor. He's got an aura of -2 to hit. So there's a lot of different things. So you need to make sure you've accounted for any modifiers you may have, and also any kind of chems you may be taking, etc. So, but unless it says otherwise, all modifiers do modify the target number. And again, the first video on the series for skill checks will cover this more in detail. And here's where I'm going to put the card. It'll be up at the top. So if you want to watch that, click that. If you're making a ranged attack, you have to determine the range, and then once you determine the range, you'll determine the effect dice to be used. So if we're going to make an attack with an assault rifle, the assault rifle has a short range of red and a long range of green. And when you're in short range, you get a black damage die and a green accuracy die. When you're in long range, you just get the black damage die. You don't get the green accuracy die. And the one thing to remember is that when you're determining range, you actually stack the rulers. You don't stack the dice, but you stack the rulers. So long range for the assault rifle will be red and then green, not green instead of red. So just another thing to keep in mind is that you're stacking the rulers, not replacing them. Melee attacks don't have a range, so you would just get whatever the listed effect dice are for that attack. If you have no melee attack card, you may always choose to use the improvised weapon, and that's just going to give you one green accuracy die and it does one damage. And all models count as having this, even if you don't, or even if you do have a melee attack card. So if you've got like dog tag fists or whatever they're called, I think that's what they're called, dog tag punch, whatever. You could still opt to use the improvised weapon. Maybe you're trying not to do damage for whatever reason. So you could always opt to give somebody the fist instead of a hammer or something. And then once the target number and the effect dice have been totaled, and remember to check your perks, your weapon cards, your clothing. Are they heroic? Do they have anything that could add to this? Blah, 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 blah. Once you've got all of that settled out, you're going to roll all the dice together. You're going to make the white skill die plus all effect dice. If the number on the skill die is less than or equal to the target number, it hits. And that the other thing to remember is that modifiers on the dice modify the die roll, not the target number. So that's the one. Well, I don't want to say the one, but that's an exception to the hard and fast rule. So most of the time, modifiers modify the target number. Modifiers on dice modify dice. Once you've rolled all the dice, you're going to total up all the effects rolled on the effect dice. Each POW symbol increases your damage by 1. If you roll a double POW, you'll actually get to increase it by 2. It's a broken helmet. We call it an armor break. I actually don't remember if and what Modifius has labeled it, but we usually call it an armor break colloquially. So each armor break decreases the target's armor by 1, and it also has the double symbol you could roll as well. And then if you see a -1, a -2, or a -3, those will decrease the number on your white skill die by the relevant amount. And then if you see a special symbol like a Nuka-Cola bottle or a star or a mushroom cloud, you'll have to look at your weapon card or anything else that you may have to see if that could trigger any special rules. So generally speaking, the special symbols don't do anything unless something says it does something. And really, again, all that means is that 9 times out of 10, you're just going to ignore those special symbols. And you should know whether or not you have a rule that triggers on those, because, again, it will say on the relevant weapon. A good example is, I think it's laser pistols or plasma pistols. Something has, like if you roll a Nuka-Cola symbol, you get to decrease armor by 1 type of thing. Like a Nuka-Cola symbol counts as an armor break. Once you've done all of that and you've added up all your dice, you're going to determine the damage type and total up the damage. When you determine the damage type, you'll look at the weapon. There's 3 types of damage. There's physical, which is a shield. There's lightning, or energy, I should say, which is a little lightning bolt. And then there's radiation, which is just a rad symbol, like the little hazmat kind of 3 triangle circle symbol. And then you're going to, once you've determined the damage type, you'll total the damage. You'll add the number of POWs rolled, which is the little explosion symbol on the dice. And then you're going to add that to the base damage of the weapon. So like an assault rifle is base damage 2, you'd roll or add the total number of POWs rolled to that 2. And I know that sounds like a lot, but we're going to do a walkthrough right now. And man, you guys get to hear my melodious voice walk you through the process. And it's not as bad as it probably sounded. So, for example, the sole survivor wishes to shoot their assault rifle. The target is in short range, which is just a red ruler. And the model has a rifle skill of 7 because their perception is 7. If we assume that there's no other dice to add to the pool, so maybe like the player has a skill that adds, or a perk that adds like a green die, for example, we're going to assume we don't have any of that. So there's no other dice to add to the pool. You're going to get the white skill die. And then because you're in short range, you'll get one black damage die and one green accuracy die. And that's just on the assault rifle card. Your target number is 7 because, again, your perception is 7, and we're assuming there's no other modifiers. Now, you're going to roll all 3 dice. Once you roll them, we're going to say that the white die has an 8, the green die has a -2, and the black die has the double POW. So what you do first is you go, okay, the -2 gets applied to the white die. So 8 minus 2 now becomes 6. I needed a 7 or lower. That means I hit. Had I not rolled that -2, had I rolled an armor break, for example, because there is an armor break on the green die, had I rolled that, then I would have missed because an 8 is higher than 7 and I wouldn't have made it. But because I rolled that -2, we're at a 6, we hit. The assault rifle has a base damage of 2, and then we rolled a double POW. That gives us a total damage value of 4. So, it does 2 physical damage, and then we add the double POW, which is 2 extra damage to 2. 2 plus 2 is 4. So the player hit with a modified 6, and then the damage of the rifle attack is 4 physical, which is, again, the shield. And now that we have determined all of the effect dice, the hit roll, and the total damage, we can move on to damage resistance and armor. Now that the damage has been determined to be 4, the target then makes an armor check. And when you make an armor check, you again determine the type of damage. In this case, it's physical, which is the shield. And then we look at the target's physical armor rating. For this example, we're going to assume that the target is wearing combat armor, and combat armor has a physical rating of 2. And because no armor breaks or the little broken helmet, none of those were rolled, the target gets its full armor rating. So what you're going to do is you're going to make an armor check. You're going to roll the red armor die, which is a D12 that is numbered 1 through 4. There's no other numbers or symbols on it. And then the target number of your armor check is your armor rating after modifications that corresponds to the attack. So again, if it's a physical attack, you'll use your physical armor rating. If it's an energy attack, your energy armor rating, and so on. And then your target number is equal to the rating. So again, using this example, our combat armor has a rating of 2. You need a 1 or a 2 to succeed your armor check. If the number on the red die is less than or equal to the relevant armor rating, the check is successful. If the check is successful, the total damage done is reduced by the number rolled on the armor die. If the check fails, the target takes the full total of the damage. And what that means is that we have an armor rating of 2. We need to roll a 1 or a 2 on the red die. When we make our armor check, let's say we roll a 1. This would be a successful armor check because remember, we need to be less than or equal to for skill checks. Because we rolled a 1, we reduce the damage by the die roll. So that would mean the 4 total damage the assault rifle would have done is reduced by the 1 that we rolled, and that makes the damage now 3. Had we rolled a 2, we still would have been successful, and then we would have reduced the damage by 2. So it's one of those where you're just making a skill check, and then the amount of reduction you get is equal to whatever you roll on the die, provided that that number passes the skill check. Had we rolled an armor break, we would be basically reducing the armor value of the target by 1 for every armor break we would have rolled, and that just lowers that target number. So again, if I would have rolled an armor break against you, instead of needing a 1 or a 2 to reduce damage, now your armor rating goes from 2 to 1. You now just need a 1 to reduce damage. And really all that does is it just lowers your potential for damage reduction. So if my armor rating is 4 and you don't have anything to modify it, I'm going to reduce the damage you do to me. And that's why power armor is so good, is because it usually has a high armor rating, and a lot of it has strong armor, which we'll get into in a little bit. So it has a lot of potential to reduce damage. And that's where the armor breaks are so important, because without the armor breaks, power armor is able to shrug off a lot of damage. Because remember, you can reduce damage to 0 in this game. Because of the way this game interacts, you actually would need to be able to reduce damage to 0, or everything would die super fast. So that's just something to keep in mind. Like I said, the armor break symbols just modify the armor check. That's all. Strong armor is annotated with a plus symbol. So when you look at your armor values, you'll see the little helmet with the symbol in it to annotate what type of damage it does. So for the physical, it'll be the helmet with the shield in it, and then you'll see the number letting you know what your rating is. So again, like a lot of power armor is just like 3 physical, or you'll see a 3+1. So what that plus means is that you're going to have strong armor, and then what the number that follows the plus means is that's the rating of your strong armor. And what strong armor is it's basically an always on damage reduction. T60 power armor has a physical rating of 3+1, and that just means that anytime you send physical damage to it, it's always going to reduce that damage by 1, regardless of any armor breaks you roll, regardless of whatever my armor checks are. They don't modify the armor check itself. It's just -1 damage right off the top before anything else is applied. Period. End of discussion. Now, there are a couple of abilities in the game that do kind of bypass it in their own weird way, but those are special abilities. I think it's the Thermic Lance has something that does that, and maybe the Super Sledge. I could be wrong on that, or the Rebar Club. One of those bigger, heavier melee weapons, a couple of them have a way to bypass it, but by and large, the core rule is strong armor is a damage decrease right off the top. And this means if the assault rifle we talked about before did 4 damage, but we did it to a T60 power armor, it would immediately actually become 3 damage before the armor check is even rolled. And then because we have a physical armor of 1, 2, or 3, we could reduce all of it if we roll a 3. So even if we rolled a 1, we're still reducing it by 1 plus 1 is 2, and we only take 2 damage. If we rolled a 2, it'd be 2 plus 1 is 3, we take 1 damage. If we rolled a 3, we take no damage. And if we roll a 4, we still only take 3 damage because that plus 1 is always on. And then you'll see some other tokens that have the armor symbol on them as well. Those are armor boost tokens. And those are strong armor bonuses also, but they're only a one-time use. So if you get hit with an attack and you have an armor boost token, every time you're hit with an attack, you remove one of those tokens. Even if there's no damage done, you still remove one of those tokens. So it's just one of those things like, you see armor boost tokens, that's what they do. They just give you a one-time damage reduction, but if the attack doesn't do damage, they still go away. Another thing to keep in mind, and this is actually a rule that our local group has messed up pretty, I wouldn't say egregiously, but it's one of those where it's not where I would think it would be. The icon is in the sidebar, which is why I wanted to make sure I added it to this video. It's not with the core armor rules. It's just kind of on the sidebar. If you see a red arrow pointing down, what that means is you have to choose the lowest value of the armor types indicated on the weapon card. And a good example of this is plasma. Plasma uses the lower of the target's physical or energy armor when you hit it. So what that means is, and a good example is the Raider power armor. I want to say, and again, I'm going off of memory. I'm not looking it up right now, but I think the Raider power armor is base 3+1 for physical, but it's only 2 for energy. So if my Raider in power armor gets hit by a plasma, I have to use my energy rating. I can't use my physical rating. So not only would I lose that +1 strong armor bonus, but I'm also less likely to reduce damage. There's going to be times where that's not super relevant. I think a lot of Enclave and Brotherhood have very balanced armor, but then you get factions like Raiders and probably some of the other ones where they're a little bit better against physical, probably NCR if I had to guess. Now that we've kind of talked about armor, we're going to talk about damage, damage types, and applying damage, and all that jazz. Physical and energy attacks apply regular damage and both immediately take away from your hit points, health, etc. And really, they don't take away from your hit points. You actually accumulate damage, which we'll get into in a little bit. But for now, all you need to know is that physical and energy attacks just apply damage. They get applied normally. They accumulate. They're the same thing. All that the physical or energy does is determines what type of armor you use. Radiation damage is a little bit different. When you apply radiation damage, before you apply it, first thing you do is you check to see if you have any pre-existing damage tokens. If you do, you then flip one of those damage tokens from base damage to radiation damage for each radiation damage received. And then if you don't, you just take the rad damage tokens. If I do 3 damage and it's radiation damage, and you've already taken 1 damage, you'd flip that 1 token and then you'd add 2 more. If you had 3 damage already, you just flip those 3 tokens. You wouldn't get more damage. However, if you had 0 damage, you'd get 3 rad tokens. And it's kind of a weird interaction, but really what it does is it means that radiation damage won't stack with regular damage. If you have regular damage and I shoot you with a radiation damage weapon, I gotta chew through the regular damage before I can start applying extra damage with my radiation gun. But if you've already accumulated radiation damage, now the regular damage will stack. And that's kind of how you need to look at it, is that rad damage won't stack with other damage, but other damage can be stacked on top of rad damage. All right, damage and extra health. And this is where we're going to get into the kind of nitty-gritty of how health works in this game. Like I said, you don't really lose hit points. You actually accumulate damage. Your model does start with a health value. And then as you take damage, you add damage to the model. You don't lose hit points. If you've played Super Smash Brothers, it's actually kind of a similar concept. As you get hit, you don't lose health. You just increase the amount of damage that you've taken. If the total damage accumulated exceeds your health value, the model is removed as a casualty. It dies, whatever you want to say. It's dead. You get to like chew on it and spit it out in front of your opponent, stomp on it, whatever you guys do, But basically, if the damage accumulated exceeds your health value, the model's dead. If an effect were to increase your health, either directly or through an endurance boost, and remember, endurance is usually what is used to determine your health. And so it doesn't have to be an endurance boost, but because that's the most common way to determine health, that's what we're going to go with. It would increase the damage threshold to remove the model as a casualty. If the effect would end and you had accumulated enough damage to exceed your original threshold, the model is then removed as a casualty. Let's take a look at an example so that doesn't just sound like some alphabet soup coming out of my mouth. We have a raider on the table. Let's say that raider has 5 health. It takes buff out, which adds +3 to endurance. That +3 would improve the raider's health, which is the threshold until death, by 3, as the raider bases its health on endurance. So because its health is based on endurance, we get to take buff out. That buff out adds 3 to our endurance. That 3 to our endurance adds 3 to our health threshold. So we jump from 5 to 8 as our health threshold. Now, throughout the course of the game, let's say the raider accumulates 5 damage. Turn 6, let's say that's when the buff out wears off, and the raider fails the addiction roll. The raider is now under a -1 endurance effect because of failing the addiction roll. The raider also loses the +3 endurance effect from the buff out, and that actually takes it to a total net modifier of 4. Because we started at 8, We subtract 3 from losing the buff out. Then we subtract 1 more for the additional effect of the buff out's addiction and wearing off. This would now set our new health threshold down to 4, and since the Raider has taken 5 damage, which does exceed its health threshold, it's now dead. So basically, Homeboy took some PCP, went out, got crunk, beat some dudes up, and then once the drugs weared off and his body went into shock from all the damage it's taken, he's now died. That's the easiest way to kind of think about it. That's going to wrap it up. I was going to dig into power armor a little bit this episode, but I decided to just do power armor in its own standalone episode simply because there was some changes to how it interacts, and that way I can get some extra info and we could just talk about everything it does for you all at once. We still have a terrain episode coming up, and then the settlement supplement. I forget what it's called, but we're going to do an overview on that. I had somebody in the comments say, hey, I would appreciate it if you kind of did a review on this. So that's going to be coming up in the future also. Again, thanks for watching, listening. I will put that Spotify link in the comments section. That way, if you want to listen to it on Spotify instead of YouTube, you can. Big shout out to Kevin. Thank you. Our Phoenix Jamie, our Immortals, Lord Wellingstone, Danny Boy, and Captain Too Tall. And thanks a lot. Make sure you like and subscribe. Have a good day.